The great journey that is Lent presents us with an assortment of possibilities. As we all know, Lent is a time of preparation, purification even, a time to step back, time to reflect, a time to think about the great mysteries of salvation, the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus, what we Christians call the Paschal Mystery. It's during these 40 days of Lent that we are asked to look at what we believe and to give praise and thanks to the God who not only has already saved us, but continues to offer us salvation. If you pay close attention to the readings from last week and this week and next week, you will discover one of the great themes of the church. I've mentioned this before, even repeatedly so, but because it's important, the church continues to offer us the covenant. The covenant as a lens through which we might understand our relationship with God. As you know, a covenant is an agreement. It's something that is binding. It's something that is formal. It's something that is solemn. It's not simply a contract that two parties agree on and they can dissolve by mutual or some other kind of consent. It usually involves the performance of some kind of action. It's not something you enter into lightly, and it's not a word that is used casually. Because a covenant obliges both parties. It's never one-sided. And the closest thing we have to it in the modern church is a marriage. A couple enters into a covenant unconditionally, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, they say, and indissolubly, till death do us part. So there are obligations. I promise to love you. I promise to cherish you all the days of my life. It is this understanding of the covenant that is the basis for the church's teaching on the sacrament of matrimony. But the relationship between God and Israel is best understood in this way. The Lord and the people enter not into just one, but into several covenants that continues to bind them together. At its most basic, the covenant bound the people to love and serve the Lord. That was their obligation, to love and to serve the Lord, and the Lord alone. But you've heard me say this before, it also bound God. God was bound to love and protect and take care of the people of Israel. And even though the people repeatedly broke the covenant, God never failed to love them. And when they turned away from God, God always invited them back. We heard the same thing last week. Remember, last week's first reading was about Noah and the flood. See, I am now establishing my covenant with you and your descendants, and with every living creature that was with you, all the birds, all the various tame and wild animals that came with you and came out of the ark. I will establish my covenant with you that never again shall all bodily creatures be destroyed by the waters of a flood. There shall not be another flood to devastate the earth. And then God says, this is the sign I'm giving for all ages to come. Of the covenant between you and me and every living creature, I set my bow in the clouds to serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Notice that God is talking about God's own obligations. It's not a covenant limited to human beings. It is a covenant with every living creature. Because God's covenant is also a covenant with God's creation, which is about as fundamental an ecological argument as anybody can make. Today we hear about another covenant. I swear by myself, says the Lord. Well, if God's not going to swear by himself, who else is he going to swear by? I swear by myself, says the Lord, that because you acted as you did in not withholding from me your beloved Son, I will bless you abundantly. I will make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. Your descendants shall take possession of the gates of their enemies, and in your descendants all nations shall find blessing. God's promise, because Abraham obeyed God's command. The covenant with Abraham is the basis of Israel's relationship with God as the chosen people. Then again, it is a covenant that obliges God. I will bless you abundantly, God says. Your descendants will be countless as the stars in the sky. as the sands in the seashore. In ancient biblical times, this was about as generous a blessing as anybody could give. And in an agrarian society, those who belonged to big families prosper because you had many hands to work the fields and to tend to the flocks. So I will bless you, and you will prosper abundantly. Next week will present us with another familiar story, the covenant on Sinai. Although we will only hear part of it, the part that we know as the Ten Commandments. The commandments present the people's side of the covenant, because these were the people's obligations. And the most important one is the first. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods but me. We will not hear the obligations that God undertakes. That's why people often think the Ten Commandments are one-sided. But we've all heard it before. You will be my people, and I will be your God. It obligates God to recognize all the other covenants he has made with Noah, with Abraham, and to confirm the promises to care for and love the people. And all of this comes to a head in the person of Jesus. How often have you heard the term the new covenant? We use it at Mass all the time. Theologians always refer to Jesus coming as the new covenant, because not only is it limited to the people of Israel, but is now offered to the whole of humanity. And it is a covenant that involves God's very self. God was incarnated, meaning God became one of us. God suffered and died, experiencing the most human of fears and emotions. But God was ultimately raised from the dead, which means that the love of God, which we have been promised from the very beginning, the love of God is always victorious. The new covenant that God as human and God as God enter into is why we are already saved, and which is why salvation is always available. And this is why St. Paul can say, if God is for us, who can be against? He who did not spare his own son, handed him over for all of us. How will he not be able to give everything else? His love, his peace, his grace. God has always been for us, to the point that God binds himself in an agreement that cannot be broken, at least not on God's side, and always holds fast to that agreement. I will be your God. I will be your God. It's a reassurance for generations. And Lent is a time that we come together to remember and to celebrate that love.